Caleb Jenkins came home to find a 6-foot metal gate installed across the back of his property, and no one had bothered to tell him. There were tire tracks on his grass, chunks of fresh soil scattered near the fence line, and a pair of orange construction flags still flapping in the wind like someone had just finished the job and walked away. The gate was bolted directly into his wooden privacy fence, drilled clean through the frame, right where his garden shed used to be, until he moved it 2 weeks earlier. He stared at it in silence for a moment, then walked over and tugged at the latch. It didn't budge. There was no lock, but the message was clear. Someone thought they had the right to build a path through his land, and they didn't need his permission to do it. His neighbor Darlene leaned over her back deck rail when she saw him inspecting the damage. "They put that in this morning," she said. "3 guys in safety vests, one with a clipboard. Thought you knew. Did they say who sent them?" "The HOA," she replied. "Said it was part of an access improvement plan. I asked if they were expanding the easement. The guy just smiled and said, 'We're allowed.'" Caleb's hands tightened into fists. "They're not allowed on my property without notice. I figured you gave them permission." "I didn't." That night, Caleb dug through every HOA document he had ever received, meeting minutes, design proposals, even the original plat survey from when he bought the house 7 years ago. Nowhere did it say his backyard was part of a community access path. The easement for maintenance stopped 5 feet from his fence line. There was no clause, no amendment, no recorded vote authorizing anything on his lot. But now, somehow, the HOA had decided that the fastest way to reach the drainage basin at the bottom of the block was straight through his lawn. The next morning, he drove to the HOA office in the strip plaza near the freeway. The receptionist looked confused when he asked for the property manager. After 10 minutes, Ben Lawton, the HOA president, finally stepped out from behind a frosted glass door. Ben was a tall, narrow man with prematurely gray hair and a clipboard practically attached to his hip. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, not offering a handshake, "I assume this is about the new gate." "You didn't ask," Caleb replied, keeping his voice even. "It was approved by the board," Ben said smoothly. "The access route will allow maintenance vehicles to reach the stormwater basin without having to drive across 3 lots. It's more efficient. You drilled into my fence. You'll be reimbursed for any damage. We have a contingency fund." "You're not hearing me," Caleb said. "You don't have a right to put anything on my property. There's no recorded easement here." "I checked." Ben's expression didn't change. "It's common land adjacent. Your lot sits near the edge. We deemed it suitable." "You deemed it," Caleb repeated. Ben didn't flinch. "The community voted. You weren't at the last meeting." Caleb didn't shout. He didn't throw a fit. But something in him settled, firm and solid. This wasn't just a mistake. This was arrogance. The kind that came from people so used to power, they no longer recognized when they were trespassing. Ben handed him a flyer on his way out, something about shared responsibility and open access community design. Caleb didn't read it. He folded it in half, walked back to his truck, and drove straight to the hardware store. By sundown, the gate had a brand new addition, a solid steel padlock threaded through the latch, not one issued by the HOA, not one with a community code. He didn't notify anyone. He didn't put up a sign. He just locked it and kept the key in his drawer. The following morning, he got an email from the HOA titled "Urgent Obstruction of Access Gate." He didn't open it right away. He just looked out the window and watched a groundskeeper in a green vest stand confused on the other side of the gate, trying to jiggle the latch, then walking off in frustration. Caleb smiled, poured himself a second cup of coffee, and sat down with the survey map again, because if they wanted to challenge him, they'd better be ready to prove they were right. Caleb didn't argue with the HOA. He didn't reply to their email. He didn't respond to the urgent violation notice that showed up in his mailbox 2 days later. He didn't even flinch when Ben Lawton sent a certified letter titled "Interference with Common Grounds Access Gate. Immediate resolution required." Instead, he went quiet, and while the board expected a fight, what they got was something far more dangerous. They got organized silence. Caleb started with the plat map. He pulled the official county record, not the vague, outdated copy buried in his HOA welcome packet, but the one filed directly with the land office. It showed everything: property boundaries, setbacks, and the legally recorded utility easements. His fence line was 100% within his lot. The gate, fully on private land. There was no shared access, no right-of-way, no conditional clause that gave the HOA, or anyone else, the right to dig into his property for the sake of convenience. He highlighted the section and printed 10 copies, just in case. Next he checked permit records. The county office had no filings under the Brookbend HOA for exterior installations or easement modifications in the past 12 months. The supposed board-approved access project didn't exist in the public record. Not only had the HOA failed to secure permission, they hadn't even attempted to do it legally. He requested a formal letter from the zoning department to confirm that any installation on private land without recorded consent would be considered unauthorized construction and subject to removal at the owner's discretion. They sent him one in under 48 hours, stamped, signed, filed. Caleb didn't stop there. He called his neighbor Darlene and asked if she'd be willing to provide a short written statement. "All I saw was 3 guys and a truck," she said. "Nobody knocked, nobody taped up a notice. They were in and out in 30 minutes. Did they say it was permanent? They said mandated by the board. That's all I remember." He thanked her. She emailed him a statement that night. He added it to the folder now labeled Unauthorized Gate, Brookbend HOA Action File. The HOA continued to escalate. 2 days later, a second email arrived with the subject line, "Final warning before escalation. Non-compliance will result in legal referral." The body was even more dramatic. They accused Caleb of deliberate obstruction of community property, creating a hazard by modifying an access point, and intentionally impeding groundskeeping services. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had trespassed, drilled into his fence, modified his land, and now they were calling it community property. He didn't reply. He just smiled, printed the email, and added it to the file. That weekend, Caleb walked the neighborhood with a clipboard in hand and his folder tucked under his arm. He wasn't gathering signatures yet, not for a vote, not for a removal campaign. He was gathering stories. Every homeowner he spoke with had one. The family across the street had been fined for hanging wind chimes. The woman on the corner was warned that her flower pots violated line-of-sight aesthetics. One man had received a warning about a small political bumper sticker on his car, parked in his own driveway. The board's reach had grown too bold, but most people hadn't fought back because they didn't think anyone else would stand with them. Until now, Caleb didn't make threats. He didn't post on Facebook. He didn't call an emergency meeting. He simply compiled the folder, added all supporting materials, and sent a single email addressed to the board's official inbox, CCing the county permit office and the HOA's insurance provider. The subject line was calm, neutral: Brookbend Gate installation, formal challenge and documentation attached. The body was just 2 lines. "Please see attached documentation regarding the unauthorized installation of a gate on private property. Pending your acknowledgement within 5 business days, I will pursue removal under property law and seek reimbursement for all related damages." Then he hit send and waited. The Brookbend HOA monthly meeting was already tense before Caleb walked through the door. The chairs were arranged in tight rows inside the community clubhouse. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A projector screen displayed a generic title slide: Ongoing Property Concerns, Resident Feedback Welcome. But no one in that room believed this would be a casual update. They all knew why they were there, and they were waiting for Caleb to speak. Ben Lawton sat at the head of the board table, flanked by Secretary Dana Vu and Treasurer Elise Myers. His usual business casual charm looked strained tonight. The forced smile, the quick glances at his notes, it was the posture of a man who no longer controlled the narrative. He called the meeting to order, ran through the minutes, and tried to breeze past the real reason people had shown up. "We've had a few minor questions about the new access improvements behind Lot 42, Caleb raised his hand before Ben could finish the sentence. That's not access improvement, that's trespassing. The room shifted, chairs creaked, necks turned. Caleb stood and walked calmly to the front of the room, a folder tucked neatly under his arm. For those of you who haven't been following this, the HOA installed a metal gate through my back fence, without notice, without approval, and without legal authority. Ben leaned forward, his voice slightly raised. The gate was installed to allow efficient maintenance access to the stormwater basin. It was voted on by the board and deemed necessary. Then why didn't the board file a permit? Caleb pulled out a printout and held it up. I contacted the county's zoning office. There's no record of any construction or modification request from Brookbend HOA for the last 12 months. That includes fences, gates, or any type of physical install on private or shared land. He walked to the projector table, removed the placeholder slide, and replaced it with a scan of the official county plat map. The outline of Lot 42 was clear, and the gate, marked in red ink, sat squarely inside his property line. This is my land. The survey proves it. There is no easement, no conditional clause, no right-of-way. You installed a structure on private property without consent. The room stayed dead quiet. Even Ben didn't interrupt. Caleb continued, flipping to a new page. Here's the state statute. Any unauthorized construction on private property may be removed at the owner's discretion. The HOA's attempt to claim this as shared access is unsupported by any legal record or architectural review. He set the folder down gently on the board table. So I locked it, and I'm keeping the key. Someone in the crowd snorted. A few chuckled. One person clapped once before stopping themselves. Caleb wasn't smiling. He turned to the board. You want access to the basin, then file a legal easement. Get my signature. Do it right. Because if you come onto my property again without that, I'll be calling the sheriff, not the grounds crew. Ben looked to Elise, who quickly turned away. Dana flipped through the meeting notes like she wanted to disappear behind them. Caleb looked around the room, and for everyone else wondering if this is about offense, it's not. It's about process. It's about respect. Because if they can drill through my property without asking, what makes you think they'll stop at yours? There were nods now, not just quiet support, but full recognition. Everyone in the room had been on the receiving end of a rule they didn't understand, a letter they didn't agree with, a decision made without their input, and now, someone had pushed back, with facts, not fury. Ben opened his mouth once more, but Elise cleared her throat. I'd like to motion that we table all discussion of rear property access until we complete a legal review of existing boundaries and homeowner rights. Dana seconded it. The motion passed. Ben didn't vote. He just sat back in his chair and stared at the folder on the table. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached Caleb. One handed him a business card for a land use attorney. Another asked for a copy of the permit letter. A third just shook his hand and said, "That was the first time I've ever seen the board look nervous." Caleb smiled. About time, don't you think? 2 days after the meeting, Caleb received a letter postmarked from the HOA, but it wasn't signed by Ben Lawton or any current board member. It was anonymous, no return name, no contact number, just Brookbend HOA letterhead, and an accusation printed in bold at the top. Ongoing hostility toward the community. It went on to claim that Caleb's public outburst at the last meeting had fueled neighborhood division, and that his actions posed a risk to cooperative infrastructure. No specifics, no direct violations cited, just vague inflammatory language, designed to sound official without saying anything of substance. Caleb knew exactly what it was. Ben was trying to reframe the narrative, not by correcting facts, but by undermining his credibility. The next morning, a thin layer of mulch appeared on the wrong side of Caleb's fence. A landscaping crew had dumped it just over the gate line, enough to kill part of his grass and stain the edge of the wood. There was no warning, no request, no apology. He snapped a photo, checked his front camera footage, and found the timestamp, 7:03 a.m., an unmarked white truck, no HOA logo, no uniform, no verbal notice, just in and out. He added the video to a new folder titled Harassment, Post-Meeting Retaliation, and then he waited. That weekend his mailbox was left open, and someone shoved a rolled-up flyer inside without postage. It wasn't from the board, it wasn't from the HOA office, it was printed on a cheap home printer and said only, "A divided community is a weaker one. Stop creating problems, Caleb." No signature, no neighbor name, just intimidation, poorly disguised, but loud enough to echo. Caleb didn't react publicly. He didn't post about it. He didn't send angry emails. He didn't call the board or storm into the office demanding answers. Instead, he scheduled a meeting with a local attorney named Michelle Cho, who specialized in residential easement law and HOA violations. They met for coffee. He laid everything out: photos, maps, emails, security footage, the county records. Michelle flipped through the folder slowly, nodding every few minutes. "They're bluffing," she said. "But the paper trail looks retaliatory, and that works in your favor." "Do I have a case?" "You have 3, she said. "Trespass, defamation, and misuse of authority. You won't even need to file, just send a certified demand letter. What happens if they ignore it? Then we move forward, and trust me, once an HOA's insurance gets wind of potential exposure, they'll fold faster than you expect." Caleb didn't want to sue. That was never the goal. He didn't want a payout. He didn't want to scare people. He just wanted to prove that silence doesn't equal surrender and that facts, when lined up clearly enough, can stand taller than intimidation. So, he had Michelle draft the letter. It was calm, precise, 4 pages, citing 7 state-level statutes, 5 documented instances of procedural failure, and 3 additional incidents since the board meeting that raised serious legal questions about board retaliation and misuse of position. It ended with a simple sentence: "Unless this gate is removed, and a formal retraction of all accusations is issued by the Brookbend HOA, within 10 business days, legal action will proceed." 3 days later, Caleb received an email from Elise Meyer. The subject line was "Board discussion requested. Please read." Inside it was short: "Hi Caleb. I'm reaching out on behalf of several board members. There's concern over recent developments and the direction this has taken. Several of us would like to meet informally, without Ben present, to discuss resolving this quietly and respectfully. Please let me know if you're open to a conversation." He didn't reply immediately. He took a walk. The gate still stood where they installed it, still locked, still unopened, but this time, he didn't feel like it was looming over his yard. It felt like a monument, not to spite, to boundaries. That night, he emailed Elise back: "Happy to meet, but I won't be negotiating away the facts. If the board wants resolution, it starts with admitting what was done, and undoing it. Quietly is fine, respectfully is better, but truthfully is non-negotiable." The next morning, Ben Lawton resigned. The notice was posted quietly on the community board, signed only by him. Effective immediately: "I am stepping down from my role as HOA president. I remain proud of the improvements we made and wish the board continued success." There was no mention of Caleb, no mention of the gate, but the timing was no accident. 2 days later, the gate was gone, not repaired, not adjusted, gone. The bolts were patched. The fence was restored. No announcement, no statement, no knock on Caleb's door, just a quiet correction. And for Caleb, that said more than any apology ever could. The gate was gone. By sunrise, Caleb noticed the silence first: the familiar creak of the hinge, the occasional clank when it swung in the wind. None of it was there. Just the soft sound of leaves brushing along his fence, and the distant hum of sprinklers firing across someone's lawn. He walked outside, and stood by the fence line. The grass where the posts had been was ruffled, flattened, but undisturbed otherwise. No apology note, no board notice, just clean wood and a fresh patch of dirt. No one from the HOA reached out that day. They didn't have to. The message was clear: the gate was never supposed to be there. At the next board meeting, the room looked different. Ben's chair was empty. In its place sat Elise Myers, still treasurer, but now acting president. Her demeanor wasn't overly confident or performative. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't hide behind vague policy language. She simply opened the meeting with a firm acknowledgement. We owe an apology to Mr. Jenkins and to the community for how this issue was handled. There was no vote, there was no permit, and there was no excuse. The room stayed quiet, not stunned silence, just relief. For the first time in a long while, the board didn't feel like a wall, it felt like people again. Caleb sat near the back, arms crossed, face calm. He hadn't come for recognition, he didn't want revenge, he came to listen, and to make sure they understood this wasn't about a gate, it was about what happens when people in power believe they're untouchable. Lynn from Lot 6 raised her hand. What safeguards are you putting in place to prevent this from happening again? Elise didn't flinch. We're adding a review process. Every physical modification, no matter how small, will require a signed vote and an accessible public record. All residents will receive written notice before anything touches their property. She paused. We've also submitted a policy amendment clarifying the limits of HOA physical access. It passed unanimously, and no one protested, because no one wanted to go back. Outside the meeting, neighbors started talking again, not the fake smiles and head nods of HOA politics, real conversations. Darlene, who had witnessed the installation, came by Caleb's driveway later that week with a Tupperware container of lemon bars. I didn't say anything at first, she said. I didn't think it would matter, but you proved that it does. Caleb thanked her and waved as she left. It wasn't the dessert that stayed with him. It was the tone in her voice, something between guilt and respect, something that said, you reminded us we still have a voice. In the days that followed, a few more changes unfolded quietly. The anonymous flyers stopped. The landscaping crews returned to their regular schedule. No more mysterious mulch dumps. The HOA's official email tone shifted, less threatening, more informative. Claire from Lot 12 started a resident roundtable group, independent from the board, designed to give neighbors a place to talk before things escalated into formal complaints. And perhaps most surprisingly, Elise herself stopped by Caleb's house with a printed apology and a simple offer. We'd like to reimburse you for the damage, and I'd like to return the key. I believe it's yours. Caleb looked at the small brass key in her hand, the one he had used to lock the gate, the one no one had asked for, until now. He took it without a word, not as a souvenir, as a reminder. On Sunday morning, Caleb stood on his back porch, sipping coffee, and watching the wind move through the oak trees behind the fence. The yard felt like his again. No gate, no construction flags, no HOA trucks pretending they had rights they didn't earn, just quiet, earned the hard way, and still standing. He didn't need to hang the key on a wall, he didn't need to talk about what happened. People already knew, and sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not let them forget. By midsummer, no one mentioned the gate anymore, not because they had forgotten, but because they didn't need to. The fence had been repaired, the soil had settled, the neighborhood, once heavy with suspicion and tension, had softened into something quieter, not perfect, but conscious. And for Caleb Jenkins, that was enough. He had never wanted to be the guy people turned to with HOA questions, but now, when a new neighbor moved in, someone would quietly suggest, if you ever get a strange letter, talk to Caleb. He knows what he's doing. He didn't wear it like a badge. It wasn't pride. It was peace earned the hard way, and a warning, unspoken but understood. The new board handled things differently. Meetings started with a review of past complaints, not to rehash, but to remember. Every new motion was paired with a disclosure about how it would affect individual homeowners. All vote tallies were posted publicly within 48 hours. The biggest change, though, wasn't procedural, it was tonal. People spoke with less fear, because they had seen what happened when someone stood up, not with volume, but with proof. Caleb stayed engaged, but not involved. He didn't run for a board seat. He didn't show up to every meeting, But when he did, people listened, and not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. One evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line and painted the fences in gold, Caleb pulled a small wooden box from his kitchen drawer. Inside was the brass key, the same one he'd used to lock the gate. He turned it over once in his palm, before placing it back and closing the drawer. He hadn't touched it in weeks, but he hadn't thrown it away either, because it wasn't a symbol of defiance, it was a symbol of line drawing, of what happens when someone decides quietly, firmly, that enough is enough. Later that week, Elise passed him on the sidewalk near the mailbox station. "Hey," she said gently, "we're finalizing the policy update next week. You landed on anything permanent. Every property line now has a review clause," she said. "Nothing gets built, mounted, or even suggested without written permission. From now on, if the board wants to install a gate, they better ask nicely, and bring cookies." They both smiled. It wasn't quite a joke, but it was close. The next community newsletter came with a new tagline: "Shared spaces, clear boundaries." No one needed to be told where that came from. Caleb didn't frame the letter from his lawyer. He didn't save the gate hardware as some strange war trophy, but the fence, the one they drilled into without permission, he repainted it by hand. One clean coat of cedar stain, sharp lines, even brushstrokes, not rushed, not angry, just thorough, like everything else he did. One afternoon, a young couple walking their dog paused near his driveway. The woman looked at the fence, and then at Caleb, who was watering the edge of his lawn. "Didn't there used to be a gate back there?" Caleb looked up, shrugged once, and gave a small smile. "There was." "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. "Then I locked it." A pause, and they never asked for the key. The couple exchanged a glance, then nodded. They didn't ask again, and Caleb never needed to repeat the story, because in neighborhoods like Brookbend, reputations linger longer than fences, and when you draw a line and hold it, people remember who drew it first.